The useContext hook. Inside a complex React application, passing data between components can become a very hard task. As we know in nested components, we use props to pass data to the child components, while functions has props to collect data from the child. If you need to pass a data, also known as a prop from the topmost component to the bottommost component, you need to code through each and every layer of components, which is known as prop drilling. This can decrease the clarity and readability in components. Also, introduce boilerplate code. And if you are not careful enough, a simple update to the props would result in reworking the entire nested structure. The useContext hook is the greatest solution for these scenarios. As the name suggests, it creates a context of data and allows the components to subscribe and manage it. The context is always created for a predefined scope of components and will eliminate the need for prop drilling inside that scope. This gives the idea of managing the state globally instead of by individual components, providing a much more cleaner and more elegant solution. Let's look at an example with the useContext hook now. Don't worry too much about the syntax of the hook since we will talk about it in the next section. In this example, we are trying to pass an article object in between several components. This object has a header, a set of keywords, a text, and a footer. As for our components, we have a header, a body, and a footer, and the body has a child component named as keyword display. In order to start using the context, first we have to create a context variable using the createContext method. Make sure it is exportable so the other components can use it. Next, we are using the provider of that context to wrap the components. And as a parameter, we are passing the article as a value. Now all the components within this context provider can access the value article by subscribing. If we take a look at one of our child components, you can see we are using the useContext hook inside them. UseContext hook accepts a parameter, which is the variable that we have created earlier in the main component. It will return us the value from the provider. Now we can use that value inside our components. This line indicates that we have subscribed to the context or we are consuming the values from the context. Similar to this component, we have subscribed to the context in every other component. As you can see, there has been no prop negotiation between components. All the values are coming from the context. And no matter how deep is your component tree, as long as you are within the provider's range, you can subscribe to the context and access the values. Now let's take a closer look at the useContext hook syntax. In order to use the useContext, first we need to create a context. To do that, we can use the React's createContext method, which will return a context object for you. Make sure that object is exportable so the other components within your provider can use that. Next, in your main component, make sure you have organized your components properly with the data that you need to distribute among these components. Then you can import the createContext object. This object has a provider which you can use to wrap the set of components. It accepts a value as an argument in which you can provide the created data. And inside one of your child components, you can import the useContext hook along with the createContext object. useContext hook will accept a context object, which is the object that we have imported now, and will return the data which has been passed to it earlier. In this example, we are extracting the header from that object and using it inside our JSX. Syntax of the useContext hook is pretty much simple. It is much cleaner than using props. At the time of using the context, if it is not between a provider, you might get an error similar to this. If we check our parent component, the vehicle component is not between a provider. To prevent someone from mistakenly using the useContext, we can pass a default value at the time of the creation. As you can see, we have created an object named car. We will pass it as the default value for this createContext hook. And when we save, you can see the default values are being populated on the right hand side. However, if we create a provider and pass in a value, the default values will be overridden. Now let's create a provider to override these default values. Instead of white, I will type red, and for the speed, I will make it 300. Let's wrap the vehicle component with a provider. And for the value, let's pass in the car object. You can see to the right hand side, the values are being overridden. Up to this point, we have seen how to use the values from the context. And now let's see how we can update the values inside the context. To illustrate this, I have set up a simple scenario, which is having a base component, title base, which is acting as our parent, and the title, which has a header 3 element, and a title select, which is having a selection. The aim of this example is to select the title and update the title component. To achieve this, first we need to introduce the useState hook into our components. In our base component, I will replace this line with the useState hook. Const title set title equals useState. Notice the import at top. For the default value, not set. Then we need to pass in the title and set title setter methods to the provider. Title set title. Let's go ahead and save that. Inside the title component, we can extract the title from it. Title. You can see the value is coming from the state object. Inside our title select component, we can use the context const set title equals useContext and title context. We will call that setter method in the onChange event handler. On change, let's take the value and set title e.target.value. Save that. When we select a value, you can see now the context is being updated. We can use multiple contexts inside our applications. To illustrate this, I have set up a simple scenario. In this scenario, our parent component is having two contexts created using the createContext hook. And their providers, I am passing car body and car engine, two simple objects. As you can see, the two contexts are nested together, allowing each component to use the desired context. Inside our first component, we are using the car body context. We are displaying the color and the number of doors from that context. In the other component, we are displaying the transmission and the top speed from the car engine context. To achieve a much cleaner code, we can move our context to a separate component. In this example, I have created a separate component named myContext, and let's move our context to that object. Let's move this part, cut it, paste it in here. Let's take this section, return, paste that, and accept the children prop. Replace this with the children. Replace this with the new component, my context. Save that. Go to the child components. Now this is coming from the my context. Similarly in the car engine. You can see it is working as expected. This is providing us with a much cleaner solution. When working with context, we can use the same context to override the existing context. To illustrate this, I have set up a simple scenario. In this scenario, we are making use of a context named as color context and passing the color blue as the provider's value. Inside the child component, we are using the useContext hook to extract the color and apply it to our styles. Suppose if we want to change the color of the middle circle, we can use the same context provider to override the color. To do that, I will copy this context, paste it as a nested context, and instead of blue, I will type red and save that. You can see the color is being updated. Some of the common examples for the useContext hook are theme providers, shopping carts, application settings, and managing logged in users. When working with useContext hook, if the calculation of the provider's value consumes more time and resources, it can slow down the application. As a solution, you can wrap your performance consuming functions with the useCallback hook and performance consume values using the useMemo hook. That marks the end of this tutorial, and I want to thank each and every one of you for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe as it helps the channel to grow. Stay safe until we meet on the next one.